Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It is my privilege to welcome you for the SME Business Excellence Awards for 2017. And it is our privilege as Dun & Bradstreet to be a part of this sector for more than 10 years. So for more than 10 years, we have researched and recorded your voice, looked at the areas where you wanted help, and we've also compared how the Indian SME sector compares with the sector in other similar countries. So as a result of all of this, where do we come out? The answer is, it's a pretty mixed message. There are some areas where I would say the SME sector in India needs to feel pretty pleased. We account for about 30% of the GDP in the country. There's about 117 million people who are employed by the sector. And of course, the government of India has recognized the contribution and the importance of this sector through a bunch of initiatives, many of which are going to directly help this sector, like Startup India and Stand Up India. On the other hand, there are some pretty sobering data points that are equally important that we take a note of. For one, if you compare how we do across countries, we actually come across looking mediocre at best and actually pretty unflattering at worst. And I'll talk some more about that. Secondly, if you look at the progress that at Dun & Bradstreet we've recorded in terms of the enablers and, in fact, the removal of the barriers, some of the problems that sit today have actually been exactly the same as they were about 10 years back. There has been progress, but in some of the biggest areas, there hasn't been enough. So let's start with the comparison of this sector with that sector of other countries. So the WTO has what they call a competitiveness index. It looks at three metrics or three groups of indices. One of them is called compete, which is essentially what is the present position of the sector today. So the operations, the product, the efficiency. At the other end is what they call change. Change is basically the sector's ability to evolve. So there we talk about agility, dynamism, innovation. And then you've got something called connect, which is the ability to link the present and the future. So it's the ability to collect, process, and to communicate data. So if you look at the 12 countries, take a look at what's on the screen. It's not going to be very easy to see for people sitting at the back row, so I'll just walk us through. The 12 countries that we've compared ourselves with are the BRIC countries, a few African countries, Malaysia, Indonesia, and we've plotted across the three groups of metrics, that's compete, connect, and change, the GDP per capita against the competitiveness score. So the GDP per capita, as you'd expect, is actually either the lowest or the second lowest in India. There's only Kenya that's below India. When you look at the competitiveness index, India is at the bottom left for compete and for connect. When it comes to change, it's a little bit better, but still, at the kind of midpoint. So that tells us roughly where we stand relative to similar industries in countries that we should compare ourselves with. The next thing to look at is the issues and challenges that you as a sector face. So as I said, we've been tracking this over about 10 years, and we've recorded what we've seen in the 10 years. So take a look at what's on the screen. This is a list of the sector's problems over three groups of years in the 10 years that Dun & Bradstreet has been recording the progress. As you see, each of these problems and each of these metrics is characterized with a bubble the movement of a bubble as you go from left to right, from red to amber to green, denotes an improvement. So firstly, there are a bunch of areas where we have improved. So, for example, government regulation has become better. The red tapeism, bureaucracy has gone down. Availability, cost of land is better. Labor-related issues have improved. So there's a bunch of areas that have improved. That's at the bottom part of the screen. Sorry about that. The lights will be right back on. What has not changed are the 5 biggest issues that have existed for the last 10 years. So that is access to finance, availability of infrastructure, availability of skilled labor, power supply, and technology. These are some of the biggest problems today, and they were some of the biggest problems 10 years back. So that's the first thing. It is a bit of a problem. The other big area that is much more quoted by you today is actually the lack of awareness of various government schemes. So whilst the government is doing a lot of things to help, the latest entrant into the problem areas that the sector would like resolved is around policy. So what needs to happen, right? So there are 3 things. Firstly, there's a bunch of problems we need to fix, we need to prioritize and know what to fix. Well, the good news is that as done in Bradstreet, that's on the screen. We know what to fix. These are the 5 big problems. The second is a first step to formulating policy, which is what exactly is MSME today? Now, let's look at the definition again. Within India, SMEs are defined on the basis of assets. So if you're a service company, it's on the basis of equipment. If you're a manufacturing company, it's on the basis of plant and machinery. Outside India, whether it is individual countries or multinational organizations, the definition is defined, is characterized on the basis of the number of employees and the revenue. So that's one thing that needs to be looked at again. Secondly, even if we want to look at the size of the investment, let's compare what India is with some other countries. So in India, whether it's SME or MSME, it's between 40,000 and 700,000 US dollars. I'm translating it to US dollars just to compare. That same number is 20 times higher in the IFC definition. It is about $15 million. If you look at the EU definition, it's 100 times higher. It's about $48 million. In the case of China, it is between $6 and $60 million. So at the upper end, it is more than 100 times larger. So that's one area that we need to look at again. And then finally, we need to just take stock of why this is important. For obvious reasons, this sector is important because a strong sector can contribute to the economy. But a weak sector is actually something that puts several parts of the economy at risk. So if it is strong, we've already talked about the number of employees. That's about 117 million. It's only going to go up and at a much more faster rate. 30% of the GDP, there is no doubt in our minds that it's going to be a much bigger contributor. But actually, there's a bunch of softer benefits of having a strong SME sector. The agility of the industry, the entrepreneurship that it creates, the innovation that it can help with, and finally, just the ability to absorb the emerging workforce, particularly the workforce that comes into the cities and comes out of agriculture. What about the characteristics of a weak sector? Well, it puts the entire economy at significant risk. So for one, we find that the SME sector can suffer from a vulnerable business continuity problem. We know that it suffers from vulnerable stability problems if it's not looked after, particularly if the problems I've talked about earlier are not resolved. It is prone to credit risk issues. It is prone to money laundering issues, financial crime compliance risks. So where do we come out, right? We have a choice to make. We know what we need to fix. We need to go and fix it. And secondly, we need to execute fearlessly. So from Dun & Bradstreet, let me just end my opening address by saying thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, for being here today. Thank you to the dignitaries who I have the privilege of sharing the dais with for being here. My warm congratulations to all the award winners, and I hope you have a lovely evening today. Thank you very much.